NFL players are suddenly reacting after reports claimed Shedeur Sanders could be leaving the NFL entirely, following the fallout from his shocking draft slide. And now, as more players publicly weigh in on how the league handled the situation, the controversy around Shedeur is quickly getting even bigger. Let me break it down. Shedeur Sanders made plenty of headlines during the 2025 NFL Draft, when he notably fell to being selected in the 5th round, after being once considered a first-round pick. But that one sentence doesn't even scratch the surface of what actually happened over those 3 days in April 2025. And it does nothing to capture the eruption it caused among NFL players who were watching in real time. With Colorado in 2023 and 2024, Sanders threw for 364 yards and 64 touchdowns. His 71.8% completion rate in these 2 seasons is the FBS all-time career record for highest completion percentage. To put it plainly, the numbers were there. The resume was there. At one point, it looked like Sanders could be the first player off the board in the 2025 draft, but he began to slip as the evaluation process progressed, and then on draft night itself, it collapsed. Day 2 of the 2025 NFL draft came to a close, with the Colorado quarterback still on the board, after being widely expected to be a top 5 pick. At best, Sanders could now only be a 4th-round pick, and the 6th quarterback off the board. Sixth. That number still doesn't sit right with a lot of people inside the league. Sanders falling out of the 1st round was notable enough that the President of the United States weighed in earlier that Friday. But for him to last more than 102 picks and make it to day 3 of the draft is the kind of development that invites conspiracy theories. The players watching from home, they weren't staying quiet. As the night went on and Sanders waited to hear his name called, media and former NFL players shared their reaction on social media. Some shared words of encouragement for Sanders, while others tried to explain the slide. Robert Griffin III was one of the most vocal voices. If somebody tells you Shedeur Sanders doesn't do anything special, just know they are full of it and haven't watched his tape. That's just pure hate and hopping on a narrative tearing him down for clicks. So tired of hearing it, Dez Bryant took a different angle. Less about anger, more about the fire he hoped this would light under Sanders. It's all a character test, Shedeur Sanders. This moment is either going to make you or break you. How you choose to move forward will determine how great you are. Robert Griffin III and Dez Bryant, 2 former 1st-round picks, offered up words of support for Sanders. Griffin said Sanders had gotten unfairly maligned, and Bryant told the Colorado quarterback to use this as motivation at the next level. Then there was Will Howard, Pittsburgh Steelers quarterback and a member of the same draft class, who gave one of the most candid takes of the entire weekend. After Shedeur's slide, Howard explained how that slide affected other quarterbacks' chances of getting drafted. It was really that whole Shedeur situation, kinda. His sliding really hurt a lot of the other quarterbacks in our class, just because he was ranked a little higher, so nobody wanted to take guys like me, or Riley Leonard, or Kyle McCord, Quinn Ewers. And then there was the moment that nobody in that draft room will ever forget. The prank call on day 2 of the draft ahead of the 40th overall pick. The still undrafted Sanders received a crank call from someone impersonating New Orleans Saints general manager Mickey Loomis. The crank call was made by the 21-year-old son of Falcons defensive coordinator Jeff Ulbrich, mocking Sanders, the former Colorado quarterback, the youngest son of Hall of Famer Deion Sanders, and one of the most widely known players in college football. The Sanders family cameras caught the moment in detail, and former Saints receiver Michael Thomas pleaded with them to turn the cameras off. It was the kind of moment that told the whole story of those 3 days in one brutal, unscripted frame. Shedeur Sanders had entered the 2025 draft confident he would be one of the first quarterbacks taken. The Tennessee Titans took Cam Ward out of Miami with the 1st pick, but Sanders had to wait until day 3 on Saturday, before the Cleveland Browns took him with the No. 144 pick in the 5th round. Potential guaranteed money lost from slipping in the draft, assuming he could have gone no money, $34 million and counting, according to sports business analyst Darren Rovell. $34 million gone. Just like that, the reactions from NFL players were loud, visceral, and all over the map. But to truly understand what Sanders was reacting to, what they were reacting to, you had to go deeper into the machinery that produced this outcome, because the slide didn't happen in a vacuum. There were narratives being built, stories being circulated, and a pre-draft process that by most accounts became a war for Shedeur Sanders' reputation before a single snap was ever taken in the NFL. The most damaging story that circulated in the weeks before the draft was the headphones report. It was reported during the scouting process that an anonymous NFL executive claimed Shedeur had arrived at one of his pre-draft interviews wearing headphones. The exec called it the worst formal interview ever, and days later, Shedeur experienced his draft day slide, with many attributing those anonymous comments as a big reason why. Then came Jonathan Jones of CBS Sports with a report that cut even deeper. Sanders' surprising slide to day 3 of the 2025 NFL Draft reportedly may have had something to do with how he conducted himself while meeting with teams. During the pre-draft process, Jones said sources told him Sanders more or less sandbagged interviews with teams that he didn't want to draft him. Jones added that Sanders did not give it his all during some of the meetings, which rubbed some teams the wrong way. The Athletic's Deanna Rossini had her own executive source. One team executive told Rossini on her Scoop City podcast, "I believe Shedeur approached these visits with teams as a recruiting trip versus a job interview." The executive pointed to Sanders' decision to forego hiring an agent as a critical mistake that left him unprepared for how NFL teams evaluate quarterback prospects. Sanders had also skipped both the Senior Bowl and NFL Scouting Combine, missing key opportunities to showcase his skills to talent evaluators who weren't as high on him, as media outlets suggesting he was the second-best quarterback in the class. One league source spoke to Fox Sports and was direct about the central tension. "He's a good person, but people didn't like the personality," the source said. "He's the biggest celebrity since Johnny Manziel to enter the draft." The massive difference between Manziel and Sanders, however, is that Sanders has no actual character issues. He's not a drinker, not a partier, not a drug user. For many gatekeepers, Sanders epitomized everything corruptive about the college game, with newly liberated players free to transfer and free to make millions in name, image, and likeness deals. Shedeur became the embodiment of the NIL era, with players equipped with resources and social media power. Sanders was more boisterous than most, wearing expensive chains around his neck, driving luxury cars on campus, and by many accounts taking a casual, almost dismissive attitude toward his interviews with NFL team executives. According to some reports, the Giants had targeted Sanders, but became so turned off during the interview process that they switched to Jackson Dart, whom they took at number 25 on day 1. There was also the matter of his father. One problem was the perception, fueled by comments Deion had made, that Deion would be eyeing the head coaching job of the team that drafted Shedeur. What coach in his right mind would have signed off on drafting Shedeur early in the process? If it also meant potentially signing his own eventual pink slip? In January 2025, Deion had said, "The only way I would consider coaching in the NFL is to coach my sons." They thought it was a foregone conclusion Shedeur would go in the first or second round, and thought paying an agent would be a waste of money. There's no way to know for sure if an agent could have prevented Shedeur from falling to the 5th round. But agents are paid that 3% to 5% to help their clients. An agent could have helped settle teams down when attacks came on his character. Deion Sanders was furious, publicly. "Stop lying," Deion said. "When you sit up there and say something like he went into a meeting unprepared, like, dude, Shedeur Sanders, who has had 6 different coordinators, who has still functioned and leveled up every time we brought somebody new in. You're going to tell me he had on headphones? Anybody knows my son understands he's a professional. He's gonna go into a meeting with headphones on." Garrett Bush, host and pundit who claimed direct knowledge of the pre-draft preparation, went further. Pre-draft, Shedeur Sanders had former NFL executives, general managers, staff prepping him for the combine. Bush said, "I don't think nobody told y'all that. Did you know that? They purposely sought out people already in the industry who ain't done the questions. They prepped him, went over everything." When you hear that he slid to the 5th round because of headphones, now you can see why that was also a lazy lie. The story was becoming something much bigger than football. This was now a collision between a young black quarterback who refused to perform submission and a league with a long history of punishing that exact posture. The divide among NFL players wasn't just about the draft. It became a philosophical fault line, a debate about what the NFL is, who it's for, and what it demands of the people who feed it their bodies and their careers. Because once the initial shock of the draft slide faded, a secondary conversation erupted that was, in many ways, even more explosive. Shedeur Sanders dropping to the 5th round surprised many fans. While some pointed out his on-field flaws, the crew at the arena, Gridiron, believed there was a much deeper, more systemic issue at play. Skip Bayless, never one to dance around a take, walked straight into the fire with one of the most incendiary framings of the entire story. During an episode of the talk show, NFL analyst Skip Bayless expressed his disappointment when a talent like Shedeur slid to the 5th round. What the NFL did to Shedeur Sanders to punish him and his father, to teach them a lesson, to put them in their place. Bayless stated, "That's what happened." The analysts on that show strongly dismissed those rumors about Shedeur giving bad interviews or wearing headphones during meetings. They felt these narratives were exaggerated excuses used by front offices to avoid drafting a quarterback with attitude issues. After Skip referred to Sanders' situation as the good old boy network, Aqib Talib agreed, stating the league does not want players with the kind of personality Shedeur has. Former NFL player and Sirius NFL radio host Solomon Wilcots, who played at Colorado himself, offered a more measured take that still acknowledged the tectonic forces at work in the situation. There were people who don't think he's that good of a player, and then there were a lot of people who think he's a great player, and he was done wrong by some conspiracy. Shedeur's draft drop captured every player's attention. It's not a stretch to conjecture that agents, coaches, and advisors have reminded NFL hopefuls to be respectful, to express humility and gratitude. For many gatekeepers, the message was unmistakable. No one is larger than the league, and no one is bigger than the game. Sanders epitomized everything they found corruptive about the modern college game. With newly liberated players, free to transfer and free to make millions in name, image, and likeness deals. The Albert Breer school of thought pushed back hard on all of this. This is going to be painted as a slide. The reality on Shedeur Sanders is that it isn't. Most teams didn't see him as a first-rounder. A lot of people didn't want to hear that. But it is what it is. Doesn't mean he can't succeed. He still can. Then there was the Athletics' Jeff Howe, who presented what might be the most honest and uncomfortable synthesis of the whole thing. Most NFL decision-makers he spoke to were more concerned with Sanders' talent than anything off the field. Those he spoke to added that the personality nitpicks wouldn't be an issue if he had put together better tape. In other words, the character concerns gave teams a reason they could put on paper. The talent evaluation gave them the permission to act on it. Both things were happening at the same time. Shedeur Sanders admits he could have approached the 2025 draft differently. But as Solomon Wilcots noted, there are still greater forces at play that helped explain his drop down the boards. A year later, to some extent, Sanders' dramatic fall hovers over the 2026 draft as well. The NFL, as if needing to acknowledge what happened, quietly made a structural change before the 2026 draft. Before the 2026 draft, the NFL announced it would limit access to draft prospects' contact information to one person with each franchise. A direct result of the prank call that still undrafted Sanders received on day 2 from someone impersonating New Orleans Saints general manager Mickey Loomis. The league changed its rules for Shedeur Sanders. That alone tells you how significant this whole thing actually was. Here's where the story pivots, because if the 2025 draft was the story of Shedeur Sanders being dismissed, his rookie year in Cleveland was the story of him forcing his way back into the conversation. Not without pain, not without frustration, but undeniably. Shedeur Sanders watched on as the Cleveland Browns began the 2025 NFL season with a 2-8 record, sitting behind Joe Flacco and fellow rookie Dylan Gabriel on the depth chart. For a player who had been ranked in the top 5 of nearly every major mock draft just months earlier, this was the reality. Third string, helmet on but not playing. Watching the team stumble through one of the most forgettable starts in recent Browns history. There were reports that Sanders had made a mockery of his team interviews, playing music and ignoring questions, allegations which allegedly led to his controversial slide. The Cleveland Browns finally ended his wait in the 5th round, and he quickly got to work, showing teams why they made a mistake passing on him multiple times. Sanders was arguably the best quarterback throughout the duration of a training camp that saw him competing for the starting job, and passed his first preseason test with flying colors. Unfortunately, injuries caused him to lag behind in the competition, and a horrendous day as the team's third quarterback in the final preseason game was the nail in the coffin. So there he sat. Third string, invisible. After being named the emergency quarterback, Sanders posted on social media, "God doesn't make mistakes. When you realize that everything happens for a reason, you'll find peace in your situation. It may not have seemed like much, but the message was clearly about Cleveland. And it went a long way towards shifting the narrative about who Sanders actually was. Then came the moment. Shedeur Sanders officially entered his first NFL regular season game when Cleveland Browns rookie quarterback came into Sunday's game against the Baltimore Ravens. After an injury to starting quarterback Dillon Gabriel, who suffered a possible concussion with a little more than 12 minutes to play, the Browns were leading the Ravens 16-10. The Browns crowd went absolutely crazy. Sanders ran out onto the field wearing his number 12, as fans at the Cleveland Stadium went wild. The Cleveland Browns quarterback actually had to quiet his home crowd so he could hear his teammates in the huddle. Sanders' first drive of his NFL career did not end well. He was sacked. A Ravens player, Kyle Hamilton, did his signature watch celebration following the sack. Even in his NFL debut, the watch celebration, the signature Shedeur Sanders moment from college, was being used against him. The irony was not lost on anyone, but he kept going. Sanders was originally named the third-string quarterback behind Joe Flacco and Dillon Gabriel. After Flacco was traded to the Bengals and Gabriel was benched, Sanders finished out the season by starting in the final 7 games. Sanders' 7 starts last season were the most of any quarterback for the Cleveland Browns. The rookie completed 120 of 212 passes for 1,400 yards, 7 touchdowns, 10 interceptions, and a 68.1 passer rating. Shedeur was drafted by the Browns in 2025, who were coming off a 3-14 season. In Shedeur's 7 starts, the Browns went 3-4. Not a world beater, but in a season where this franchise had won 3 games total the year before, and where this quarterback had played the full year as an afterthought on the depth chart. Going 3-4 while learning the NFL on the fly was enough to make even his critics pause. In his rookie year in 2025, Sanders played in 8 games, starting 7 of them. He completed 56.6% of his passes for 1,400 yards and 7 touchdowns with 10 interceptions. This led to a Pro Bowl selection. He made the Pro Bowl as a 5th-round pick from a 5-12 team. Browns' 5th-round signal caller Shedeur Sanders was added to the Pro Bowl games roster as a replacement for Drake May, who couldn't participate in the games ahead of the Patriots' appearance in Super Bowl LX. As Sanders reflected on what the season had given him, he was clear. "I think overall it helped me get to myself quicker. I think I'm almost there. I think I'm almost back to myself fully, emotionally, mentally, and physically." Deion Sanders, watching from Colorado, confirmed what the family had been through. The outcome of the draft hurt Deion significantly because, as he explained, he couldn't do anything about it. "That was the first time in my life that I couldn't fix it," Deion said. "I've always been able to fix it with all my kids. But as that bull was going on, I couldn't fix it, and he wanted me to fix it, and I didn't have the power to fix it. And that hurt, because I felt like I wasn't there for my son." After starting the final 7 games of the 2025 NFL season, Shedeur Sanders appeared set to be given the keys to the car regardless of who was on the sideline. Todd Monken arrived from the Baltimore Ravens, and after developing a cordial relationship with Sanders, seemed ready to name the second-year quarterback his starter. However, after the voluntary workouts, Deshaun Watson appears to lead the race. The irony is almost too much to take in. Shedeur Sanders, a player who spent the entirety of 2025 fighting just to get on the field, who made a Pro Bowl, who turned a 5-12 disaster of a season into a legitimate argument for his future, is now entering 2026 watching his starting job slip toward a quarterback who hasn't played a single snap since October 2024 because of a torn Achilles. Browns owner Jimmy Haslam said that Watson has a great chance to be the team's starting quarterback in 2026. According to ESPN reporter Daniel Oyefuzi, Haslam, the same owner who approved the quarterback room that Shedeur was buried behind, was now leaning toward the man he had previously called a big swing and miss. On NFL Live, ESPN reporter Mina Kimes shared her expectations for Cleveland's offense in 2026, noting how impressive the Browns' offseason roster rebuild had been. Then pivoted to Shedeur Sanders for the quarterback. "If it is Shedeur Sanders, who for my money is probably still the leader in the clubhouse, none of that will matter if he can't play faster. Last season when he threw the ball in rhythm, he actually wasn't bad. In fact, you see here, 2.5 seconds, that's in rhythm. He had a QBR of 64, which is below average. but it's definitely sufficient. And then when he held on to the football, it was over 3 seconds. QBR of 4, which is surprisingly near the bottom of the NFL. That habit started at Colorado, where PFF had Shedeur Sanders at 3.18 seconds to throw in 2024, ninth highest among FBS quarterbacks with at least 200 dropbacks. Interestingly, no other FBS quarterback was sacked as much as Sanders over his last 2 collegiate seasons, 94 times. As for the 8 games he played last season, he got sacked 23 times behind a porous offensive line. The quarterback battle is very real. Looking toward the future, Sanders is currently in the middle of a quarterback competition in Cleveland for the 2nd offseason in a row. This year, he'll be battling Gabriel and Deshaun Watson, who is returning from a torn Achilles. Sanders has a real shot at earning the starting role from new coach Todd Monken. Browns insider Mary Kay Cabot thinks the early schedule, along with a young roster, could tilt the QB race away from Shedeur. I really believe that Todd Monken will choose his starting quarterback based on who gives the Browns the best chance to win. But if Deshaun Watson and Shedeur Sanders are really close down to the wire, the road-heavy early slate could be a factor. Through all of it, Sanders has been choosing his words carefully, almost defiantly calm. Respectfully, I just don't want to talk about last year because it doesn't help us move forward. Sanders said, "We not in last year no more. We in this year." Sanders has been chastened to an extent, though a year later, he has not been humbled. And that may not be a bad thing. During the Cleveland Browns OTAs, Sanders was asked to reflect on his draft experience a year later. He was typically reflective. "I don't look at anything as a negative," he said. "When you start looking at things as a negative, that's when you grow spite and hatred and nothing positive comes out of that. So I view everything, it's just like, I'm just happy. I'm thankful, I'm blessed. I was in a position to where I can handle everything that comes my way. So now I feel bulletproof. Bulletproof." That's the word he chose. Not bitter, not broken, not leaving. And that is the verdict on the question of Shedeur Sanders and the NFL. He was drafted as if they didn't want him. He was buried on the depth chart as if they had given up on him. He made the Pro Bowl anyway. He's now competing in his 2nd straight QB battle, as if he's still fighting for a roster spot, which in a very real way he is. Shedeur Sanders admits he could have approached the 2025 draft differently, but there are still greater forces at play that helped explain his drop down the boards. Whether those forces were about football or about something much deeper, in how the league treats players who refuse to shrink. That's a question only the league itself can honestly answer. A year later, the debate over Shedeur Sanders lives on, even as a new batch of prospects is being drafted, and every player in that league, from rookie minicamp all the way to the Hall of Fame, knows exactly what his story means. You can fall to the 5th round, you can be 3rd string, you can be passed over for a quarterback coming off a torn Achilles, but leaving? Shedeur Sanders is not leaving.